Hello and welcome to Agree to Disagree, the series where we take some opinions from around the Fire Emblem community, I pose them to my guest, and we discuss whether or not we agree with them, and why. Before we start, I would like to thank the people who back the channel on Patreon, where for £1 a month, you can get access to a bunch of benefits and help the channel out. For more information, check the link in the description. If you have a take you would like to see appear on this series, feel free to drop it in the comments, or there's a channel for it in the Discord server, which is linked in the description. If you're a content creator who's interested in appearing on this series, feel free to get in touch via DMs on either Twitter or Discord. Today I am joined by Mekkah.
Hello, I'm Mekkah here. I play and analyze Fire Emblem games, and I enjoy doing that a lot, so I've been doing it for a long time. And, now I'm on here just to talk some more Fire Emblem, just for a change of pace, I guess. And if you don't know who I am, use the YouTube search bar, or you can find me in the description, I'm sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, just in case you don't discuss enough Fire Emblem, we can talk through some more here, just in case you needed a change of pace to discuss more Fire Emblem. But yeah, we've got a few takes to go through today. The first four come from around the community, the last one is one of my own concoction. Starting off, take number one. Fire Emblem's frequent discarding of past mechanics and innovations is a detriment to the series as a whole.
Right, is this when I say, oh, I strongly disagree?
You can either go into your thinking first, or you can go straight out with your opinion. It's up to you.
Okay, I'm fairly new to all this. I usually only make my own takes. This is a difficult one to start us off with. You hit me with a hard one, because Fire Emblem does discard and innovate a lot, but I'm reminded of this other little niche series that does this a lot, which is Pokemon, which is very often criticized for it, which might be where you got the idea from then, right? Yeah, so Fire Emblem does this, but not in a way that annoys me as much as Pokemon, because it feels like Fire Emblem is still very loyal to its older mechanics, even as it innovates. But I do think the series would be better if they kept some of the old ones that turned out to be successful. Sometimes it feels like they discard things too much. So I guess, yeah, I think I would agree with this one, but it's not as bad as it is in Pokemon. I think that's how I put it.
Yeah, so I think it definitely depends on what the mechanic and innovation is, right? Because some of these which get discarded, you can understand, right? We don't want the gold system from FE4 in every game in the series. It's quite unique to that game. Or something like Thracia Fog as an example. But it also feels like we don't see the fully optimized version of a lot of these mechanics, and we never sort of get to see them be a bit more refined and a bit more clean in a way. We just almost get like the test run of each one. I'm thinking like Battalions from Three Houses being a particularly notable one, or even the monster mechanics in that game would have been something that were cool to return in Engage, but they were kind of left behind, and we don't know if they'll ever come back.
Yeah, I feel like Fire Emblem usually goes through cycles along with the systems it's on. So every time you have like the initial game on a certain console or a certain era, and then the next one will innovate on top of it and make it almost perfect. Best example, probably Path of Radiance to Radiant Dawn. Path of Radiance is a little bit rough around the edges, but then Radiant Dawn is almost perfect mechanically. And then same thing in GBA with like FE6, and then goes into FE7, FE8. More and more innovations as it goes on. And then after the era is over, it's just in the trash you go, and some of it never comes back. Like, we haven't seen rescuing in a while. We haven't seen shoving and smiting. Well, shove and smite, I guess, are somewhat in there.
Their abilities now rather than general things, but yeah.
I guess I can't really count that one because it's still technically in there. But we do need the shoving animation to come back as it was. That's a very important aspect of it. That greatly increases the fun of shoving people around.
True. We sort of get it in Engage, but only on enemies when you use the smash weapons, which still happens after they die, and it's very entertaining.
True. Maybe I'm being unfair. Did you see La Pogne did this LTC of Three Houses Crimson Flower? I gotta say this correctly. And there's one part in Final where he needs to shove Edelgard a little bit upwards so that she makes it to the final boss.
Yeah.
And the game bugs out a little when one of the characters uses shove or smite on her, and she has like her dying sound or whatever. And he's like, ah!
Oh my god.
Yeah, in that way I'm being unfair. They actually implemented smite very faithfully in that way.
But there's some mechanics as well that have only been around for like a single game. You look at something like Fatigue, for example, or the rotating armies of Radiant Dawn. I guess you kind of get that with Echoes and Gaiden as well, but I don't know how well those would translate to sort of more games in the series, whether or not those should be more specific to one game, so... It's interesting that the games have their own gimmicks, but some of these mechanics I wish were brought around a little bit more.
Yeah, it's important to make the distinction between concepts and execution, right? Because if you execute it poorly, then that has no reason to be in there. Something like, for example, the Fate's Children is a mechanic that they technically kept from Awakening, but it was a bad idea because it didn't fit into anything whatsoever. It was very ham-fisted. So this is something that you do have to do well if you're doing it. And you can imagine that if you were to, for example, implement rescue into engage right now, for example, it probably wouldn't work very well because the game is just not designed. Like, Canter doesn't even work unless you're gaining XP from your actions, so that would have to be reworked too. So it does have to fit into it. And in a way, it's not necessarily bad, I think, to ditch old mechanics because it does give individual games more identity. You brought up Fire Emblem 4 earlier with the gold system.
Yeah.
That is a nice, unique thing about it, and putting it in another game would lessen that a little bit, I think. So you have to be a little bit careful, but I do think some mechanics that we've talked about before, like the monsters, for example, would have been perfect to just put in engage. You could have done more like that. Although they do have multiple health bars sometimes.
They do. The multiple health bars is definitely something cool, and I really like the multiple health bars, and I guess that's kind of why I'm going to fall on agree on this one too, because it would be a real big shame if we got to the next Fire Emblem 18, whatever that may be, whether that's a genealogy remake or something completely new, and we lost those multiple health bars. And it's always nice that we get these new mechanics. There's always something to be excited for. We know that the game's not going to be the same as the last. But there's also that little bit of a worry that, oh, this is a really cool mechanic. Will it stick around?
Yeah, it also extends, like, the main annoyance from me from when I discard things is not necessarily mechanics. Like, I can understand why those would be gone. But something like quality of life improvements, I think should almost never go away. The 3DS games and the DS games have some of the best quality of life in Fire Emblem, but that's partially because they have a dual screen, so they just have a more logical way to divide all the information across two screens. And I think Engage UI, it's very hit and miss in this regard, because in some ways it's a massive improvement, to the point where I forget that it's an option because I just can't believe that they implemented some of the things in this game, like the way you can see subclasses by pressing a button, or the way you can check an enemy's attack stat in one quick button press. You can even customize it a little bit.
All weapons being displayed just by hovering over a unit. You can see their entire inventory, things like that.
Yeah, or even like health bars being displayed has been an innovation for a while. Those kind of things you should almost never discard, I think. So those definitely need to stay. And that's, I think, the main annoyance people have with the Pokemon games, is they discard those kinds of things a lot.
Yeah, that's definitely a good point. Keeping those quality of life features and the things that are pretty much just strict improvements for player appreciation of the game, I guess, is probably something that should stick around. So yeah, I fall on agree for this one.
Yeah, no, I'm out of things to say on this one.
Yeah.
It's kind of quick when you agree on things.
We agree to agree. It's nice. So, take number 2. The convoy system of Fire Emblem 6 and Fire Emblem 7 with Merlinus and the item limit is the best way the series has handled the concept. Now, I believe this take came from my Discord server, and I believe it may have been made specifically because of an FE7 playthrough I've got going on currently. It's a co-op playthrough. And on the chapter where you get Geats, we basically spent over an hour having to shop. Which, because we left our convoy very full, and we had to go around, or get everything out of it, sell, go buy a bunch of stuff. I think that might have been the motivation for this particular take. Do you have any thoughts on this?
So the item limit, is it referring to Merlinus only storing like 100 items?
I believe that's the item limit in reference, yes.
Yeah, okay. I do enjoy a little bit of strategizing around Merlinus and convoy warping and stuff like that. You can also do it with the Lords, though, to be fair, but I think with the tent is infinitely more funny and interesting than just, Marth is carrying 200 items in his back pocket and you can just pull them out whenever you want.
Yeah.
That has some funny implications too, but it's weirder to me. It's less realistic, and it's more fun if the convoy is a real mechanic you can engage with. I think Engage has like an item limit of 999 in the convoy.
Does, yeah.
The opposite.
It felt very bad seeing that after the whole shopping issue.
But you can still interact with it with Alir. I think the convoy's been on the Lord for quite a while now, actually. I think it's been on Alm, Celica, the whole squad.
I think Ike might have been the last one where it wasn't in Path of Radiance.
Yeah, Ike is the worst one.
Yeah, there's no convoy at all in that game. You can't.
Yeah, it's just if you go into Clash with 2 little weapons, you're just kind of screwed.
Yeah, you can literally just run out of weapons mid-fight, and the game's happy to let you do that. I kind of like that in a way, though. Like something sadistic about that I quite enjoy.
But he also has like 4 people in his employ that are his convoy.
True.
Like he should be the least one worried about it.
Yeah.
It makes no sense. And also, that game only has 4 item slots and then 4 weapon slots, which it feels like it should be more because it's totals to 8. But I feel like I always want more weapons and less items.
Yeah, I don't think there's much of a cause ever for 4 item slots. I don't think we ever need as many items as weapons. It is a little bit overboard.
And then Radiant Dawn says, all right, that's fine. You can just have whatever it is, like 7 or 8, whatever you want. And that's a big improvement because, again, Radiant Dawn, nearly mechanically perfect. And in a way, I don't know, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense for me that we can just carry the convoy on the Lord all the way around.
Yeah.
And I guess just by virtue of like by elimination, FE6 and FE7 win by default, because generally this mechanic just isn't all that interesting. It's just, okay, if you need anything from the convoy, just go to the Lord. And you can do funny tricks with it, but it's very weird, and the Merlin's one makes way more sense. So I never really thought about it in this takes way, but I think I'm going to have to strongly agree just because of lack of alternatives. They could definitely do more interesting things like that. Like, actually, real quick, FE1 has the funniest convoy system.
Yes.
It's awful because it's on the NES. It's absolutely awful.
Yeah.
But if you improved it to be more interesting in a way, that could beat FE6, FE7, I think.
That's a fair point. I do like not being able to just pull things out of the convoy whenever you like. I think I prefer the tent to the caravan. I quite like it being like sort of locked to somewhere near your spawn, and if you want another item, you have to go back to it, especially in relation to things like javelins and hand axes, normally limited by like 20 uses. I'm thinking FE7 and 8 when I say this. Being able to just keep pulling those out of your Lord's back pocket definitely gets a bit silly, because it could have been an interesting way to limit those items a little bit more if they had lower uses, but they're obviously very flexible. You can use them in a lot of situations. So I quite like the tent from FE7. I'm not a huge fan of the caravan. Well, the caravan's better than the Lord's, I guess, and at least we get a convoy rather than FE9, but I think I'm just going to fall on agree with this one. It's an interesting question, though. It's not something I've thought too much about myself either, so it's nice that this one came up.
Yeah, I guess one really relevant thing here that we did kind of touch upon is that in Fates and Engage, weapons have infinite uses, so there's less need to pull out a replacement.
That's true.
Which I'm very glad about, by the way. I think that was a good change to make an Engage. It's just, okay, once you have money, you effectively have infinite hand axes and javelins, and what usually ends up happening for me is I'll use a javelin from 20 uses down to like 9.
Yes.
And then carrying it into battle is super awkward. You want to carry a backup, but then it takes up half your inventory space, basically. Or you just want to ditch the 9 uses, and then your javelin only really had 11 uses. It feels very awkward to use. So this is a big change. But it does mean that the convoy gets less interesting, because now the only time you'll need to pull something out is if your preparations were insufficient and you actually needed to bring, I don't know, a torch to a torch map or something. Which,
yeah, or like
that's usually my
staves
fault.
And stuff like that, right? Like, you might pull out you might just enter a situation in a map where there's a particular use for like an entrap or a fracture or something like that. One of those more niche staves, I want to say, that you don't necessarily need for every situation. You can just pull them out of Aaliyah's back pocket and start throwing those around.
Yeah, and that makes it extra awkward that this game doesn't have counter after actions like pulling an item out of convoy, because usually either Aaliyah or someone else will be horribly out of position for it. But I guess that's the price you pay for mismanaging your items, so I can't even be too mad at that.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting, especially in Engage's case, like you say, because you don't necessarily need weapons. It's mainly staves and I guess items like elixirs and things like that you might want to pull out. But yeah, it definitely is an interesting way of handling it, but I think I prefer the FE6-7 system, particularly the FE7 tent. So,
Same.
The next take, this is quite a spicy one. Permadeath should be permanently removed and replaced with a different kind of incentivization to not let units fall in battle.
Okay, so I disagree with this one, but I know where it's coming from, and I do share whoever's take this is frustrations. I just don't think removing it is the right play.
So, some other SRPGs have done interesting things with the permadeath mechanic and, things around that. I know Dark Deity, rather than having your units permanently die, they suffer a permanent stat drop. Whenever they fall in battle, you get them back, but they're always going to carry that battle scar. They're always going to be weaker. Which is, I think, is an interesting way to do it, but I think permadeath is just so almost core to Fire Emblem that it would feel weird to have a game that doesn't at least have it as an option.
The way permadeath is right now in Fire Emblem, especially in Three Houses and a little bit less so in Awakening, it feels like a bit of a relic that they can't quite handle, but they're not quite willing to let go of it. So it keeps occurring, but in this super awkward in-between way. Before it was just like, all right, your unit is dead, they're gone, they're no longer present, which it means you have to ride around people being dead all the time, and that has its issues. But you can still do it.
You get
just
your
have to
occasional
put a lot
units
of
like
resources into
Soren,
it.
right, or Titania, who would stick around after death for plot reasons, but most of the
Yeah,
time...
there's still a couple of those, but
Yeah.
the problem with that is if you overuse that cop-out, then it almost feels like there's no permadeath, because if you look at Awakening, if you are a female unit, then you're invincible. It's basically the lesson that Awakening teaches us about permadeath. And the same way, I think Fates does that with Dance, I'm not quite sure. But basically, there has to be consequences for your actions if you're willing to play on, and if those consequences is, oh, this unit is wounded and retreats, it feels a lot less severe.
Yeah.
And it takes away the fun of permadeath, I think.
Yeah,
But at the same time, I've learned that trying to do alternative things like Dark Deity still feels kind of bad, like the stat drop. I get what they were going for. I haven't played Dark Deity, by the way, but I do know that debuffs feel bad because I've played Fates, and I don't like my stats being lowered at all. Which, yeah, I mean, it's fine to penalize me for dying, but I'm just gonna do is like reset.
Yeah, it probably ends up in a
I don't
similar
want my
place
units to be worse than they
functionally.
could have been.
Yeah. So, there's definitely, I think, consideration, but I think Three Houses is a really interesting example, because that game is very clearly designed around your units not dying, with the long-term investment into units, the very strict lack of late-game recruits, and obviously Divine Pulse plays an element of that too. So, I think in a game like that, they maybe could have gone without permadeath, because it just feels kind of clunky in that game.
Sure.
But I think, by and large, I strongly disagree with this one. I think permadeath's probably something that, for the betterment of most games in the series, should stick around. It's one of the more, I don't want to say unique aspects of Fire Emblem. Obviously, quite a few SRPGs have implemented a similar thing. But the fact that you can get very attached to a unit and they can just fall, and then you have to make that choice between pushing on or restarting an entire map can be quite interesting.
Yeah, it can be, but I've learned that it's often a very annoying choice to make rather than a fun one, because restarting a map nowadays is just not fun with how long some maps have gotten. So it's like, I have to restart. And I know this is the point of permadeath, but when you're playing FE6 Chapter 8 and your unit dies against the boss because you made like a speed miscalculation or something, you're not going to go back for a unit you were never going to use in the first place. You're probably not going back for anyone if you really value your real time. Because replaying maps is just boring, especially if you're a content creator who just wants to play on stream or whatever, and then you die, and it's like, well, either you replay it off stream, which is boring because no one's watching, or you replay it on stream, and then it's boring for people watching. So what choice is it really? It's a choice between a boring one and a not so... I mean, it's just playing on without... That's where the main content comes from, right? You have to play on without them, but that still feels bad in some way. People are just unwilling to let go for good reasons. I don't think an alternative would make it necessarily better, because let's say instead of your Lina now being permanently dead, she suffers a stat drop that's permanent. That still feels so bad. Like all the way through the playthrough, you're gonna be wondering, oh damn, I wonder how good this would have been without the -3 speed or whatever I got from dying. So I don't know if it should be replaced. I think the game should just be designed around units dying, mechanically, in the gameplay, and in the story. And the best implementations of that are by far, I think, Echoes and Path of Radiance, where units will have conversations about other people being dead. They'll change their endings, they'll change the way they talk to other people about it. This requires extra resources, and that sucks for the developers, because that means they have to invest more people, more money, etc. But it does make for a more polished experience than this kind of halfway thing we had here with Three Houses, and even Engage a little bit. Engage has like some replacement units that are better than others, but those units are also just like really good, and they can also die. And in Engage, like early on, sure, you get some replacements, like you'll get some new mages if your old ones die, but beyond chapter 17 or so, if you have like new units, they are not that good. And at some point you're going to run out of units that are actually viable. You don't want to deploy like a level 4 Saline in chapter 17 and be like, I'm replacing my dead Pandreo with this level 4 Saline. That's not going to work.
The big issue with Engage, right, is like a lot of the stronger units are those replacement units, like, so you're probably going to be using those in the first place, and then if they fall, your replacement is the early game units who you ditched 10 chapters ago. So you don't really get replacements for the actual good units, because you put those straight in your team anyway in most scenarios, I feel.
Yeah, and the units that are most likely to die are the ones that you put on the front lines, aka the good units. What I've experienced in my Iron Mans is it's not going to be the Salines or the clans who die most
Yeah,
often. You're going to be careful with those. What's going to die is, oh, Marin couldn't actually take 3 Berserkers in one enemy phase, or
yeah.
Panets, or Kagetsu. Those people are most likely to die because I'm
Mhm.
throwing them into everything.
Yeah, and I think you definitely make a good point around maps getting longer as well. I feel like as sort of quality of life changes have came through and we can skip animations and things like that, they've gone really hard into letting maps be quite a bit longer, obviously excluding Genealogy of the Holy War, that's an outlier, but in modern Fire Emblem, maps can really get long. I know the final map of Engage took me 7.5 hours on stream. That was quite the time. So, I mean, admittedly, final map, you don't necessarily have to restart as much, but yeah, even like just the 2 or 3 hour maps, which it felt like there were a lot of in Engage from my first playthrough, like a lot of maps where it would have been quite the investment to restart. It could get annoying to do so, although I guess that's why Divine Pulse exists and Dragon Time Crystals, or whatever they're called in Engage.
Yeah, I think overall that Divine Pulse and Time Crystal have made the series more accessible, and in a way, there's a higher percentage of your time where you're having fun playing Fire Emblem. I think that is definitely a conclusion I can draw from my experience. Doesn't necessarily mean that it's the ultimate best solution to make Fire Emblem fun, and it's a different way of looking at Fire Emblem as a strategy game. Instead of, I've said this before on some other discussions I've had on Engage in general, is you're no longer required to find the best, safest solution ever to a map that always works. You just have to find a solution that works once. If the RNG cooperates, if you maybe if the AI cooperates a little bit once, you're good. If you survive the enemy phase, you can move on, do other things. And then 10 Rewinds makes it so that you can just try things out, and if they don't work, you go back. So you spend less time doing math, checking enemy ranges, etc. And you spend more time just making moves and seeing, okay, what happens if I do this? Oh, this goes wrong, I'll just go back and do something else. Which isn't really compatible with permadeath. I mean, it is because it forces you to play in a certain way still. But, the permanence of permadeath is less felt with this mechanic in play. But you still have to keep it in mind when you're deciding on your final moves. And when you run out of pulses, it still gets super intense, of course.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you do run on those pulses, it feels almost like you've got more to lose in a way because you've put so much time into a map already. One thing I do want to touch on is, how do you feel about FE11's answer to this, where if the more units you lose, you get replacement units, you get, I think they're all named after Spanish numbers from what I remember.
Oh, you mean those from the DS emblems?
Yes.
Oh, yeah. They're my favorite because at some point, depending on localization, they'll make fun of you with their names. One of them is named Owned, and one of them is named Lame, and one of them is like Awful, but they're like written in a funny way where you don't immediately catch it, but once you realize it, it's super funny. They're broken, like they're really stupidly strong. They just destroy the game's economy and action economy, but they're a funny implementation to make sure that people don't get soft locked, which I can appreciate. I don't know if they would really fit in today's thing. I think honestly the ideal approach is just give us a lot of units throughout the whole game, and they don't necessarily have to be better than units you already have. They should actually be a little bit worse, because there should be a reward for keeping units alive from chapter 1 onwards. So honestly, FE1 and its remakes did it kind of the best, I think.
Yeah,
the remakes, the generics, they're funny because they're bad stat-wise, but that makes them fun to use because killing anything with them seems like an achievement. And also have 0 luck, so you can just like melt to a crit at any time. It's just a very fun gameplay experience. I played a draft run that's not on like recording or anywhere, where I got bored in the late game of Shadow Dragon, so I started warp skipping it. But I started warp skipping it using one of the generics. I just had the generic use all the stat boosters and just start one-running bosses because the game is that broken. You can just do that. So I had Owen Dark, the Dark Mage, occasionally reclass the Swordmaster, just one round, like the Garneth chapter boss and Michaelis and stuff like that. It was a new thing that I did in Fire Emblem, which I didn't expect I was going to be doing after so many years of playing this game. They're fun, but I don't think they would fit in another game. I think they fall into the category of past mechanics that we don't necessarily have to see again. It was fun while they were there. They're part of the identity of the older games. But I think the better system is definitely just give us a bunch of units.
So where do you fall on this take overall? I'm gonna sit on strongly disagree with this. Permadeath should be permanently removed and replaced with a different kind of incentivization to not let units fall in battle.
Yeah, I'm gonna strongly disagree. I think whatever you can think of that replaces permadeath is just going to feel bad, and I don't mean in the way that, oh, death makes you feel bad, that's a good thing, you should feel consequences, but more in the sense of this constant feeling of dread of like, this unit is worse now. That sucks. I'm gonna bench them or reset anyway. It doesn't make the game more fun, I think. But maybe I could be wrong. Maybe there's a way to make it fun, and you're welcome to prove me wrong with a comment or whatever. But I don't think anything is going to be better than just, you died, the unit is gone. It's very clear. It's it's hard to make it better than that. So I disagree.
Yeah, I think there's definitely some room where different things could be done, potentially even as options. You could have, like, permadeath, yes, no. Obviously, we've got casual and classic, but there's no real penalty to units falling in casual mode. So there could be some different...
You can't... They're unavailable for a chapter, which is supposed to be the penalty,
True.
I guess. But, yeah.
Yeah. But... yeah, there's definitely things they could do with it, but I think by and large, permadeath is just so central to Fire Emblem, it would be almost weird. I'm also not ready for the discourse if they ever remove permadeath. But I don't want to see those conversations on Reddit and Twitter.
I don't think they ever will, because they've had casual mode since, I want to say, Shadow Dragon, and it hasn't been removed since, right? It's always been there. And, some people like to pretend that elitists want to remove casual mode, but
no.
I haven't actually seen anyone go against casual mode. All I'm saying is you shouldn't design a game around casual mode being the default. That's all I'm saying. And I don't think that has happened since, like, Awakening.
Mm-hmm. So, same take on that one. We're on the same page a lot here. Next take. Most Fire Emblem games would be improved by allowing you to deploy a much larger team, potentially all of your units.
Strongly disagree.
Okay, interesting.
Do you have a difference, finally?
Well, we might do. I definitely don't think I strongly disagree, but that's... I'm not sure where I quite fall on it yet.
Okay, so I'll just expand on my thoughts a little bit. Then we'll see you come in, I guess.
Yeah.
So, all right, picture a game with massive maps, and maybe slightly unoptimized UI, where you spend your turn moving unit and then moving your cursor to the next unit, and then you do that 24 more times. And then again, let me remind you, the map is large and the UI is slightly not optimal. But you're deploying every one of your units, so you have 24 units you have to move around the whole map every single turn. That game exists. It's called FE4, and it's miserable to play that way.
Sure.
It sucks.
I think this is maybe where I'm a bit of an odd one, because I quite enjoy that about FE4. I quite like that massive scale feeling of, like, your turns take a long time and your armies all moving in different directions and things like that.
Okay, but would you want it for every...
absolutely not, no. I think it only works in the context of FE4. Doing that in anything else would feel fairly atrocious.
Yeah, I think FE4, if we get a remake of it, one of the main things we have to fix about it is make it faster to move units across these massive maps. Because I think the massive map should stay. It's part of the game. It's part of the core experience. But I don't really have fun moving a unit exactly 12 tiles, and if I get to 13, I have to go back and then to do it like 12 more times. That's not very fun. So let me just give me some auto move options to make sure the people I want to pair end up together. That's all we need. And then I don't need that experience in every single Fire Emblem game. In fact, I think it's also easier to design maps around smaller player teams, because that makes it much easier to give the player an intended experience. Like, make it so they can't break your map by accident, and make it very easy to win without having to engage with any of the map things you've set up for them, any of the traps, any of the strong enemies, etc., etc. So smaller teams make it easier to design. Moving people takes a long time if they're all deployed. That said, deployment limits are sometimes a little low in recent Fire Emblems, especially in paralogs in both Engage and Three Houses. It feels like you just have to bench your main army, because the game is like, oh, you're getting 3 new people, so I guess you're ditching 3 of your old guys, and that means you have 7 deployment slots and one of them is forced because it's a lord. Good luck, you can pick 6 people out of the 10 you've trained. That feels bad. Even if you can deploy them as adjutants, that does kind of suck. So we need a more meaningful way. Like, I get that you don't want to give me 14 units to control. That's like what I'm propagating against here, is don't give me too many units. So find a more elegant solution than adjutants, because adjutants suck. So I don't know, give him a different part of the map to be deployed on, and then have it be like a side scenario, or reward me for undeploying people, like give him XP when they're on the bench, and that way it's easier to catch up and you solve the whole permadeath problem as well. Something, give me bonus XP for undeploying people. Something. But no, I don't think we should be deploying our entire team. In fact, one of the first Fire Emblem pitfalls that I ever made was you should design your team around how many people you're deploying in the final chapter. Like,
Yeah.
No, you don't.
No,
you don't need to
that's-
worry. If you're playing Chapter 5, worry about what's best for you to do in Chapter 5, not the final chapter. Don't worry about whether you're using Joshua against the Demon King or whatever else you're fighting. Worry about what Joshua can do for you right now. And, you know, if you're deploying a unit as a filler and then you're going to ditch him later, or if you're going to have another filler unit just redeployed to help you out for a couple maps, that's fine. Your team should be a little bit flexible in that regard. So don't worry about your exact team size and exactly who you're going to power feed XP to. Just play the game one map at a time and have a good time. Don't worry about the final chapter.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I definitely
Disagree. Strongly disagree.
Strongly disagree, okay. So,
Yeah.
I guess the issue I kind of have with this is I would like another Fire Emblem outside of an FE4 remake where we have these huge amounts of deployment slots and we can, like, split our army up in multiple ways. I'd like another game like that, but I don't think it would particularly suit any game that's currently in the series. I think that's absolutely fair. And I think some of the smaller maps where we have very small deployment slots, something like Genesis from FE7, can be really fun to try and actually handle that wouldn't be fun in the same way if we got 24 units on that chapter, or however many you get in that game by that point. So, I think if you designed a game specifically around having larger team sizes, it could be enjoyable. And like you touched on, some of the smaller deployment slots in Engage particularly feel really bad. That's run of chapters like 12 and 13 just feels fairly awful. You get a lot of strong units that you want to deploy, and you don't have many deployment slots, so you end up just benching half your early army, and it just kind of feels a little bad. But yeah, I can definitely get where you're coming from, that it wouldn't be good for every game in the series so far. I would like more of it in the future, but I think I'm going to just fall on disagree for this one. I think sometimes deploying a larger team would be nice. Although, it's weird because I've always been like kind of an advocate for the smaller deployment sizes of 3 houses. I really quite like the smaller deployment limits, the 10 to 12 units in that game. I think it does a lot for things like replayability, to not be able to use every unit in a playthrough, because you get to be excited about using someone in your next run, like in Engage in my first playthrough. I haven't used Panette, I haven't used Marin, I haven't used Pandreo. So using those units in a future playthrough is something I still get to look forward to that I wouldn't really have if I could just deploy 5 more units and I brought all of those guys along. So I think I'm just going to fall on disagree for this one.
Can I hit you with one more funny example that I just thought of?
Absolutely.
I don't, do you play like ROM hacks and like side fan-made?
Touched them a little bit, but not massively.
Okay, so I played one that's called Sun God's Wrath a while ago on my channel, and I'm sorry, I don't remember exactly what episode it is, but there's one episode where you're in like a massive palace, and it feels a bit like a defense map. Like, think of like the Tower of Volney kind of map, but bigger, or like the FE6 Gaina chapter with like the bishops and the heavenly arrows. That chapter, think of that, but then like wider.
Okay.
It's kind of formatted like that. And you get to deploy, I don't know, 16 units of your own, but then you also get to control like 10 more generics in addition. They're just blue. You can control them for that map only. You only have them there. And they're all like referencing older characters. You get like Tilchu and Reinhardt and Ishtar, but they're named slightly differently, but they're obvious references.
Yeah.
And so the map is pretty big, and you have all the units to control. And it took me hours to record that map, because if you make a mistake, you have to go back a turn. Like, I was using safe states, I'll just blatantly say it. I was just using Mekkah's turn wheel like all the way through, and it still took me so long to get a winning recording of that map. I also couldn't live commentate it because that would make it take even longer. It was miserable. It's absolutely miserable. So if you like more FE4 experience, I guess I can recommend that map to you, but I never want to play that map again. It wasn't that the map was badly designed per se, it's just controlling so many units and moving them to the optimal place is so mentally draining. So,
yeah,
that's
can
part of my
definitely,
experience.
it can add a sense of scale, but sometimes you don't really need that sense of scale, right? You want quite a tight experience that flows quite quickly. Sometimes the big whole, we're part of a large war experience is fun, but sometimes the little small scale fights are also quite nice too. So
yeah, I mean,
sorry,
just to make sure I'm not trying to shit on Sun God's Wrath here, because other maps did not have this problem. It's mostly this map where that problem occurred.
Absolutely fair. So, one take left to go, and this one doesn't come from elsewhere in the community. This one is one that I sort of came up with, not necessarily a take I agree with, but one I wanted to pose to you. Unit identity is more important than unit flexibility. Now, I'll give you some context. This mainly revolves around the fact that reclassing and a lot of things in conjunction with that are often said to hurt unit identity, but is that unit identity actually more important than being able to be flexible with your units?
I think I agree with this one. I generally enjoy the more rigid class systems than the more flexible ones, the reclassing ones, like Engage and Three Houses. I think those do a good job of making units. It feels more like you're playing with classes with different portraits when you're changing different units than you're playing, with different units. For example, right now in Engage, my first playthrough, I used Etier, turned her into a warrior, gave her Lin, and then she speed takered people and just kind of crushed everything. And now in my second playthrough on normal, I'm using Jade, and one of her best classes to reclass into is warrior, so I did that. And then what goes well on a warrior like that? Well, it's Lin again. So now I have Etier version 2.0, and my suspicion is that this experience will probably happen every time I change someone into warrior, one of the better classes, and give him one of the better emblems that synergizes well with it, Lin. And that means that I don't have to go that way every time, but the fact that if I try to make the best decision at the moment, I end up with the same result feels kind of samey. And I know units have minor differences in their base stats and their proficiencies, but you can kind of erase them very easily. In fact, you probably will erase them as you're trying to optimize them a little bit. And so it makes units feel a bit samey. And the same occurs in Three Houses. I think we've all know the complaints about Three Houses class balance and how Wyvern is pretty far above everything else you can have in that game. And I want to say this goes beyond just the best class and the best emblem pairing with the best class type you go into. It's just, if your unit is too flexible, a bit of their identity is lost, and you have to make up for that in some way. You can, if you properly design personal skills or very variable base stats, or proficiencies affect the unit a little bit more than just, I have to get this one emblem to get a certain bot level, and that erases the whole problem of not having proficiencies. Stuff like that. There needs to be more, and Engage is a little bit lacking in the personal regards, so it feels like everyone is a little bit more samey. Three Houses the same problem, where units have boons and banes, but the way to solve having a bane is just put more time into that unit with the tutoring system, and you still get your warrior or Lysithia or whatever you want. It's just, it feels worse because it takes longer to get to.
How do you feel about combat arts and abilities in Three Houses? Do you think that helps offset it with things like Swift Strikes, Vengeance, Point Blank Volley, those other abilities? Do you think that helps to sort of counterbalance the class flexibility in a way?
In some cases it helps. It really helps when a unit has a unique one. Annette can use the magic axe to like a certain effect that no one else can. That helps. But at the same time, it can also be part of the problem when you have 3 units with Swift Strikes, and the best way to use them is turn them into a Wyvern and use Swift Strikes all the time. Kind of get the same thing. Hunter's Volley, another example of something that could, in theory, help with that, but in practice, it's just, turn a unit into a sniper in their Hunter's Volley, and there's no way to distinguish between Ashe, Anna, Ignatz, Shamir, and whoever else does that. Like, they have their differences, but they're not very large. Point Blank Volley is a better example because that one is on like 2 units, Hero and Leone. That one sets them apart. But it's still just using a Braveheart to kill an enemy. It's not inherently much more interesting. The setup for it is still the same too. Everyone goes through Brigands to get Death Blow, and then they maybe go to Archer to get Head plus 20 to deal with avoid bonuses. Like, to have identity within a flexible system, you need more incentives, you need more differences between units than the ones that we've been given so far, and so far Fire Emblem has spectacularly failed at doing that. I think the biggest offender is definitely DS Emblem reclassing, where people are really not that different. Their differences are basically just a personal stat table on Serenus Forest. That's the main difference between all the units in FE12.
Yeah.
And figuring that out is boring and a headache. Whereas, if a unit's identity is part of their class, or if their class is part of their identity, then it makes it very easy to make people feel unique. Look at Isadora in FE7. There's really no unit in Fire Emblem like her, because she's the only female paladin that starts as a paladin that has her kind of stat layout. Whereas if FE7 have a reclass system, there's probably other units that would be just like her.
Yeah, you could put like Rebecca or somebody, or Florina or someone into that class, and she loses a bit of that identity.
Yeah, exactly. So I do think identity is more important. I think you can do both. I just think Fire Emblem hasn't managed to do it, and I don't know if it's possible with the confines they're working within right now.
So, do you come down specifically on strongly agree, or just agree, or?
I think lightly agree, because in theory you could make it work both ways, but right now they're definitely leaning towards flexibility.
Yeah, we have seen that focus on flexibility for the past few games now, and I think it's hard to say which one's more important. I think Three Houses actually did quite a good job of keeping individual unit identity whilst allowing some class flexibility, but just not to the extent which I think satisfied quite a lot of people. I've always had an issue with kind of the whole unit identity being defined by classes thing, because the main thing I'll look at is something like Cavaliers. A lot of your Cavaliers can feel very similar because the units are in the same class. And they lack, I think in a lot of the games where identity is defined by class, they lack a lot of things outside of that. I think of GBA and FE9 as well when I say that. Like, a lot of your Cavaliers feel very similar in a certain way. They might have, like, different stat layouts. Lowen's a bit more bulky, Kent's a bit quicker, Sane has more strength. But by and large, I think they can feel quite similar. And I quite like that flexible classes has made them have to give units a bit more identity in other ways than just their class. But classes can be such a cool way to actually define a unit, and I'm not super familiar with it, but I think some units are really hurt by this in the context of things like Jagan and FE11, right? Who, I think a lot of his things come from around the fact he's a paladin, and then reclassing him out of that makes him not a paladin anymore. And it can definitely
it's
hurt
pretty
in
funny
some
when you have a game with supports in it, like FE12. If you reclass Draug to something else, and then you have a support convo between him and Chris, Chris will tell him that, oh wow, I heard you took like 1,000,000 arrows through your shield or whatever, and meanwhile Draug is like a hunter with 20 HP and 2 defense, and he just dies to a single round of combat.
Yeah. So, I also think, like, some of the engaged characters can suffer from this quite a lot, particularly the Solm Wyvern users, Ivy and Rosado, because they get super cool Wyverns, and then I just put Rosado in Griffin Rider and never saw it again. It even got a small cutscene role, and then it just went and never came back. And, you know, that Wyvern almost was part of his identity as a character, and then I just took it away from him and gave him a Griffin instead, so he could use staves. Which was... It does feel a little bit bad in that sense, so... I think I slightly agree with this. I don't think I strongly agree with it, but... I like flexibility in my units to a degree. Whether or not it's more important than identity is questionable.
Yeah, I think a lot of people's happy medium here is the 3DS games, specifically Fates and to a lesser extent Awakening, because a unit can become a couple of classes by default using the Heart Seal or Second Seal, but they can unlock more classes through like Marriage and Friendship and Fate specifically.
Yeah.
So you have to work a little bit hard to make a unit go into another class, but they can do it. You're just limited on a hit through what you do in gameplay. Corrin and Robin can of course become anything and then pass that down to children and spouses sometimes, depending on what game you're talking about. And that changes it a little bit. I think with the way how good people have gotten at optimizing Fates, especially, it's almost Engage and Three Houses again, where they can just become anything if they want it to be. But it's still limited enough to where a lot of people like it. And I haven't too much experience in the 3DS emblems myself, but from toying around with it, I do think it's a better system than what we have in Engage and Three Houses, where it feels like anyone can become anything with a little bit of work. Whereas in Fates, for example, you really have to work for it. And for someone to become a class they don't have access to by default, they pretty much have to marry Corrin sometimes, which you can only do once per playthrough. Yeah,
I think like probably the most obvious example is after Chapter 13 in Engage, when you get a certain emblem who gives you access to axes. And then at that point you can just go through your team, and you've also got bows at the same time, and you can just go, okay, and you become a warrior, and you become a warrior, and you become a warrior, and you become a warrior. And it's just like, well, this wasn't really necessary. Like, you just end up with a team full of quite similar units in a lot of cases, particularly I think on a first playthrough where you don't know everything that's good. So if you recognize a class is good, I think it can be quite tempting just throw everyone into them.
Yeah, and that's why on the first playthrough I try not to do that. Like, I go out of my way to diversify my classes, even though I know that it's better to go all in on one class I know. I think one other thing in Engage that doesn't help here is that they made variations for all the class types. Like, there's a hero with swords and axes, there's a hero with lances and axes, etc. So they have like, you don't even need a certain proficiency to become a certain class all the time. So if you want to become a hero for dual assist gimmicks, you don't even need the right proficiencies. For that, also erases a little bit of that personality, individuality they were trying to go for with the proficiencies on a unit.
That's definitely a good point. Like, the weapon flexibility can be nice in some ways, it just adds a little bit of variety to the classes, but it can definitely make classes almost feel too accessible in a lot of cases.
Yeah, especially when you have an emblem like Leaf, who can just teach a unit anything as long as the bot level's high enough with him.
Yeah. Thankfully, he misses quite a big portion of the game, so you can't do it all the time, but yeah, it's definitely... It's odd, in a way, because the idea that, like, oh, you can do what you want with this unit, you can do fun stuff, maybe that should be more limited to a New Game Plus type concept, I'm not too sure. Like, maybe if we got a more restricted system in a regular playthrough, and then it could expand in New Game Plus. I'm thinking Three Houses specifically, maybe we can get some more of those options in there. Maybe at base, like, Caspar can only go, like, the Brawler Brigand lines, and then from everything else, then you can throw him into your Dark Mages and your Paladins and your Wyverns and all that other stuff. That would potentially be interesting. But yeah, I think by and large, unit identity is more important than unit flexibility.
Yeah, I mean, it's a personal preference still, I think. Some people just do enjoy that kind of sandbox experience, but it does make it really hard for the developers to make an intended experience for a map when, you know, you're not supposed to have 6 Wyverns to trivialize a map, for example. That it hasn't hurt my Engage experience too much because Engage is fairly new and you need to put some effort into breaking it. But if you look at Three Houses, they just made a map and said, all right, that's it, we're done. It's 5 o'clock, bye.
Yeah. I mean, with my Engage, I was using Tamara. I really liked her as a character, so I was using her in my team. She wasn't performing in Picket, so I just put her in, is it Picket, her promoted class? I think it is.
Yeah.
So I just put her into Warrior, and she immediately became, like, my 3rd or 4th best unit by just bonking things with Killer X's. And then I also had, like, Gold Mary and, like, Kagetsu, and yeah. I ended up in kind of Warrior City towards the end of the game, but I don't know. There's debates to it, you know, the flexibility can let people use characters who are otherwise underperforming, characters they may be attached to. They can, you know, find uses for them. Again, like characters like Caspar, for example, who may not be the best character, but you can put them in strong classes. It can help in a way. People use, like, their favourite units, but I like when those units are a bit more defined as units. So, that was our last take for the day, and we were fairly agreed on most of them. There's a little bit of difference in sort of our intensity and feeling on a couple of them, but I think we were on the same side of the spectrum all the time.
Yeah, I guess you just have the right opinions.
I guess so. So, thank you very much for coming on.
No problem.
Yeah, I hope you enjoyed it, and yeah, once again, check out Mekkah's channel, link in the description if you haven't seen it already. But yeah, make sure you give him a look.
Thanks for having me.
So that wraps up this episode of Agree to Disagree, and I'd like to sincerely thank Mekkah again for appearing on the show. I really appreciate him coming on. And I'd also like to once again thank the people who've backed the channel on Patreon. It really helps me out a lot, and yeah, I really appreciate the support, so thank you very much for that. Lastly, I'd like to thank you all for watching. I really appreciate you checking the video out, and I hope you've enjoyed it. If you'd like to discuss this video, the channel, or Fire Emblem in general in more detail, check the link in the description to the Discord server. Other than that, thank you very much for watching, and I'll catch you all next time. Goodbye.